welcome to yet another thesis video. I'm your host, Miikka, as usual, and I'm joined here today by JiaYing Chew, who is a doctoral candidate at the University of Arts London, London College of Communication, and a teaching assistant at National University of Singapore. Jia, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, we are talking about visuals in thesis, and your thesis, brilliantly named Anatomizing Transdisciplinary Higher Education Through Strategic Design, utilizes many visuals. Now, to begin with, why did you choose transdisciplinary higher education as your thesis topic?
That's a good question. I started out as an industrial designer in my undergraduate, and then I moved on to do service design. While working as a service design researcher, I realized that we were communicating with people from all different disciplines, and I thought it would be interesting to try to understand how to integrate that knowledge better. Which is
Mm.
why I joined the International Design Business Management graduate program. Uh, Funny enough, my thesis is on the IDBM program because I found it interesting to uh, kind of navigate the differences in disciplinary knowledge, both from a teaching perspective, but also from how
Mm.
students receive that information. And that was something I was studying in my master's thesis.
That's really cool. And you know, it's a pity because it talking about your thesis content wise alone would be interesting as well for sure, um, but then looking at the visuals, right? So um, what did you like from your point of view, like from your perspective, what role do you think visuals play in academic writing?
Mhm. So I often find that in academic writing, sometimes when I read just the text, I don't really fully comprehend what is being conveyed. So for me, it's also a bit challenging because sometimes we use different words, especially in across disciplines. When
Hmm.
I say stakeholders from design perspective in business school, stakeholders actually mean something else. Stakeholders from the business point of view actually means someone who's a paying client or someone who has like actual stake in that project.
Hmm. Yeah.
Whereas for design, stakeholders basically anyone who's involved in the process and people we want to involve in our research, right? So I think visuals kind of conveys that going beyond just the words that we use, and that makes it a lot easier for people to understand just like at a glance what you mean, even though it may not be the full picture, but it kind of adds on to the text, and I think that's quite charming in its own way.
That's really, yeah, that's a beautiful way to put it. So it kind of enables, they kind of sound a bit like kind of inviting. So they are not, visuals can invite people from other disciplines to kind of engage with your work.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
cool. So we are lucky enough, or we are lucky to have you walk us through two of your visuals that you have personally chosen from your thesis. So
Mm,
yeah, would you like to start with the first one and then the second one?
sure. Actually, um, how do I share it? Do I just talk about it?
Yeah, just go ahead and I'll add when I
Okay,
edit.
sure. So, I think in one of the most, I guess, visuals that I'm most proud of would be this one on like page 71 of my thesis,
Hmm.
which has very many different layers. talking about like the research process and the different tiers of like how I engage with the material. So I had talked about things from like the student level, the course level, program level, university level, and industry. And it was very difficult to explain that without having a visual. So like at every phase, because I was trying to understand what the nuances were for transdisciplinarity across the different levels of this ecosystem that I was working with, and
mm,
trying to explain it to people was so tiresome, even verbally. So I tried drawing out this like diagram which had so many different layers and over a temporal period of time to demonstrate what the research phases were for me. And I think that was one I was most proud of because it really, at a glance, you can see what I was doing at the different phases throughout my thesis, and also like who I was engaging at different phases of that research. And I thought that was quite fun to create that visual in a way. Yeah.
cool. And did you have like kind of previous, or did you have like several versions, or did it come instantly into your mind, like what you want to convey or create?
Definitely not immediately. I think when creating visuals, the hardest part is starting. I think it might be the same with academic writing. Like um,
Mm,
for me, there were so many things that I had done, and I think in the design process sometimes it's also quite intuitive. So uh, like one thing leads to another. You research something and you find something. You follow another lead. It's almost like kind of navigating
mm,
while you're doing it, right? Research through
yeah.
design, and like as I was doing that, I was trying to chart out, or I think I started doing it temporarily, like trying to figure out what I had done throughout those months. That was the first thing I did. And it was just like a really draft doodle on a piece of paper. And then I was like, oh, but it doesn't really explain why I had done it in a certain manner. So then I started drawing all these
Mm,
different layers. But then at some point, that piece of paper just looked like a huge mess. Like even I didn't understand what I was doing. So I tried
mm,
working with different shapes and like different colors to explain what was going on. And I felt like that process in itself was quite informative for me to try and craft what I was going to write about as well. So
mm,
yeah, that was quite therapeutic actually.
mm.
Yeah.
Well, I like, yeah, thanks for bringing that up. That's actually really something really relevant, right? That the visuals, they serve multiple purposes, but like
Yeah.
also for you as an author. Wonderful. So what about the other one?
The other one that I have is not something I drew, but more of a photograph. So I think a lot of times in the design process, we do a lot of things iteratively. It's
Mm,
quite difficult to explain to people what went on in the workshop setting. So like in on page 85 of my thesis, there was actually this image where I had conducted a workshop with the faculty members, and we were doing this activity called Education Blueprint. And we had basically mapped out like a whole like almost an entire year's worth of like the first year's curriculum put on a temporal way, kind of like just on the wall with a lot of post-its. And I know it sounds like, every design
mm,
workshop does that, you put post-its on the wall, but there is some kind of method to the madness, and it was hard to explain just through text or like a figure what I was trying to do. I think you
mm,
really needed to see like who were the people in the room and what was the process, and uh, I felt like only a photo could really convey what I was intending to do. And I think that's also kind of interesting because in order for you to convey that message, you also kind of need to have the setup to take the photo and be able to demonstrate what you want to show and how the entire like context was like. So for me, photos are very powerful, and I think
mm,
that's something I use quite a lot in my work as well. Yeah.
mm. Yeah, that's a really good point. So like it's not only like when I think about what you would say like kind of traditional visuals in academic writing, they are often boxes and arrows, but
Yes.
also,
Yeah.
drawings, photographs, and hmm, that's wonderful. So now, for someone like me or anyone who is interested in having more visuals, or yeah, someone like me who doesn't know how to create visuals properly, um, what kind of advice would you give to people on visualizations?
Hmm. So even though I'm design trained, I wouldn't say I'm very good at drawing. Um, for me, there is a lot of, I feel like as long as you have a circle, a square, arrows, triangles, and a kind of organic shape, it makes it a lot easier for you to start putting something on paper.
Mm.
Uh, the first advice would be do not use smart art on Microsoft Word because because it actually I think it limits your imagination of what a visual can be. We're so used to seeing those diagrams because in academic writing we often use flowcharts, and that's like one box leads to another in a very specific manner, using one box to an arrow with a different like box. And like when you start thinking about like visuals in that manner, I think it limits your imagination of what a visual can look like. A lot of times I think we always start with things that are familiar to us, whether
Mm.
it is working with a temporal way, kind of like drawing a timeline of what you've done, or listing down what are the important elements. Converting something from a table to a visual is actually really easy because once you start picking out those same elements and drawing the connections, you start to realize that, oh, actually, if I had what things are prioritized and which things are not, if they are less prioritized, you could use a lighter color or like a dotted line just to demonstrate that it's something that's relevant but not key. And then
Mm.
just using really basic shapes gets you somewhere, and then you can get, I guess, a little bit more daring in starting to use different colors. And that process is actually quite. I think it's a discovery of sorts. Um, and once you start doing that, you start to realize it's not so scary after all. Uh, so yeah, that would be my advice.
Hmm.
Just start somewhere.
So wonderful. So no need to be afraid of the visuals, but keep it simple and start from there.
That's right.
Hmm. So just to recap, your thesis was called Anatomizing Transdisciplinary Higher Education Through Strategic Design, and today we discussed visuals in the thesis. Jia, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts, and yes, thank you so much.
Thank you.